What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over how we can swap the locked on actor between a list of potential actors within the lock on radius. So for example, if I am here and I have this one character locked on, and you see I now have a symbol to show which one I'm locked onto as well. Okay, so I'm locked onto this pumpkin golem. I can unlock this and I can go and lock onto this pumpkin golem. So I have a button to swap between the actors within the zone. And by pressing that button, I can switch which one I'm locked onto, and then everything can proceed as normal. I can walk around them. I stay locked onto them. The other pumpkin golem, as you can see in the background there, is not still locked on. They don't have the lock on symbol. And then I can disengage the lock whenever I want and continue about the rest of my gameplay. Okay, so we're going to have that little icon indicating who we're locked onto and where they are, even as we get farther away. And then I'm also going to have the ability to lock onto different actors as well. All right, that's what we'll be covering today. Quick note before we get started, if you want to get caught up in the series, I'll link the entire playlist in the top right corner right here. You can check out everything we've done to get to this point, so you can see how we did our inventory, our movement, our enemies, all sorts of stuff, and get caught up to where we are right now. Alternatively, if you don't care about that and you just care about the lock-on, that's fine. You should at least watch part 1 of the lock-on mechanic, as there is quite a bit of the logic in there that we're going to be using and improving today. All right, with that said, we can go ahead and get started. So the first thing we need to do is add an input or use and repurpose an already existing input that will change which actor we are locked onto. Like I said, we have this one here, but if we press a different button, we can go and lock onto the other one as well. Just like that. So this button that is changing which actor we're locked onto, that's what we need to configure. So if we go to Edit, Project Settings within the editor, scroll down and go to Input, and under Action Mappings, we need to either use one or find one that we want to use here, or add a new one. I'm going to add a new one because I have target lock on as 3, and so change lock on target for me will be 4. So if I have these two next to each other, I'll never forget what the buttons are. Of course, when we get into controllers, it'll be a button on the controller, and it may have different actions, so you can name it whatever you want. But long story short, make a new action mapping by pressing the plus here. Call it something related to this, change lock on target. Or if you're repurposing another button, just keep track of what the name of the button or input is. Then bind the actual input on the device, so 4 on the keyboard for me. And once you have this, we need to set this up in the code just like we have all of our other controls for our character. So we can go into the code and we can do this part immediately. We're going to have to go into the .h, but let's configure this new input action that we just mapped. So if you go to your third-person tutorial character.cpp, or essentially your base character.cpp, and scroll down to your setup player input component function. Now, in this function, this is where we have all of our presses and releases and the functions that they call. So what we're going to need to do is bind our new action to a function that we create. All right. To do that, we need to go into the third-person tutorial character.h class. I'll go up to the top. And we need to go where our other lock-on functions are, or where your functions are in general. It doesn't matter where you put it. I have the void toggle lock-on function from the previous lock-on episode. And I've made a new function here called change lock-on target. And it's to change the current lock-on target if possible. So if there is another target we can lock onto, we are going to want to change to it. As simple as that. Now, while we're in here, I've also made a blueprint implementable event. And I should change this category to lock on. or let's say targeting, actually. Targeting. This blueprint implementable event is going to spawn the widget that gets placed on the screen that tracks the actor. And we want to do this in the blueprint because I'm going to make an actor for that image, for that widget, and allow it to follow, and then also clean it up when we stop locking on to players, right? Because when we lock onto an enemy or another object, we want to start tracking it, but when we stop locking on, we also need to get rid of it. So it's a little bit more advanced than just spawning it and leaving it there, right? It's not going to clean itself up. So we have to spawn it, keep track of it, and then remove it when we're done with it. So I've made toggle lock on effects. That is a blueprint implementable event. We'll call it within the toggle lock on and change lock on target functions. This way we always have the proper UI indication of what character, what enemy, what object is locked onto. So essentially make these two new functions and make sure that one of them is a blueprint implementable event so we can fill out the logic in the blueprint. Once you're done with that, we can now call this function in the setup player input component. So if we go back to the CPP now, we need to bind our new action. I went to where we bound target lock on because it's pretty simple and it's also similar and related, so why not keep them together? You can copy this entire line and paste it below, or you can write a new one. But essentially what we're doing is we're using the player input component to bind action, change lock on target. Change lock on target is the new input action that we made in the project settings right here. Make sure you have that exact name. And you put that right here. When we press that button, we then want to go to this object and call this function. So we're calling change lock on target, which is the function we made right here. So now when we press 4 on the keyboard, it will pick this up and say, okay, call this function. Simple enough. Now let's scroll down to our toggle lock on function. This is the function we made in the previous episode. For me, that is right here, toggle lock on. In the previous episode, if we were already locked on to an actor, we set that to be false. We were no longer locked on, and then we reset the actor that we're locked onto. However, now I want to call our new blueprint implementable event because when we stop locking onto an actor, we need to remove the current effects revolving around locking on. So in this case, we're going to spawn a widget that is going to show what character, what actor we're locked onto. And so here we want to disable that. So we want to call toggle lock on effects. Don't worry, we'll go over the implementation of this event when we get into the blueprint side. But just know that we want to disable it here. So call it anytime your lock on changes. If your lock on is being enabled, call it. If it's being disabled, call it. If it's changing the actor or object that is currently being locked onto and targeted, call it. So we're going to call it here to disable it. Then you see in the else, we check to see if there are any candidates we could lock onto. And if there are, we lock onto the first possible one. Then we're setting is locked on to be true, assuming that locked on actor was a valid actor. After locked on actor is set to be true, I went ahead and called toggle lock on effects because now we want to enable the indicator that we are locked on to that actor. So those are the two changes, both these function calls right here, that we have to make within toggle lock on. Now the other thing we have to do is create the change lock on target function. Right? So we made it in the header file, we bound it to the setup player input component, and now we have to fill out what actually happens within this function. So if you set this function up, change lock on target, we can start at the top here, and what we're going to do is we're going to loop through all of the potential candidates. Like I said, when we are within range, we could have 2 targets, 5 targets, 100 targets that we could lock onto. And so we need to go through all of them, and we need to see which one we are locked onto, if any. And we need to change that to be a new one now, a different actor, because we want to be able to swap between them in case the player wants to attack a different actor. All right, so we're going to do a standard for loop. Integer I equals 0, started at 0, and make sure that we're running this for loop while I is less than lockonCandidates.num. That's the array we made in the previous episode, keeping track of all of the actors within the radius that we could lock onto, and then increment I every time. So standard for loop here. Basically, we're going to go through every single actor within this lockonCandidates array. Now, if we are already on the actor that we find in this array, we don't want to switch to it, right? We don't want to go and hit change and we end up on the same actor. It would make no sense to do that. We're trying to change actors. So if locked on actor equals lock on candidate I, lock on candidates at this index, if that's the actor we're currently locked onto, then we want to go in here and we want to change this function. Otherwise, we can leave it alone because we're not trying to do anything with the actors that we haven't touched yet. We only want to do this logic if we're already on the locked on actor. This will allow us to go in a sequential order. So if the locked on actor is equal to the lock on candidates at this index, that means we have found the actor that we're locked onto in this array, and now we're ready to change it to a different actor within the array. Now we have to set the ground rules, and we want to make sure that we don't go out of bounds of the array. So if the index we're on is greater than or equal to the maximum amount of actors we could lock onto, then we're going to crash. We're going to try and access an element that doesn't exist. So we have to make sure that if I is greater than or equal to lockonCandidates.num, the maximum amount of candidates in this array, minus 1, because remember, I starts at 0, but num returns the maximum number of elements in this array. So if there's 5 elements in lockonCandidates, it's going to be indices 0 through 4. But we don't want to use 5 as an index because that would crash. Remember, it's 0 through 4. So 5 minus 1 would be 4. That would be your maximum element in your array. So as long as I is greater than or equal to that, we know that we are at the maximum actor within the lockonCandidates array. And what we want to do is flip around back to the start. We want to now go back to the first index, which is 0. So we can go ahead and hard code this, and this is perfectly safe. It's not bad practice. We know 0 is the first index of the array. So we can set locked on actor to be lock on candidates 0. And this is very similar. This is what we did up in toggle lock on when we initiated the lock on. We just couldn't change before, so that was the only thing we did. But if we're also at the maximum index in the lock on candidates array, we want to go back to index 0. Now, remember what I said earlier, anytime we enable, disable, or change the target, we want to call our toggle lock on effects. So make sure you call that. And then I've also called break underneath of this because at this point we want to break out of the for loop that we're in. We no longer want to try and change target. We've already found the next target. We don't need to continuously loop. In fact, if you did continuously loop, then it would keep changing targets automatically. We only want to change it one time. So once we have found an actor to lock onto, we call break. Else, okay, so if we are not at the maximum candidate or element in this array, we just want to go to the next element in the array and lock onto that actor. So else, locked on actor equals lock on candidates I plus 1 as the index. We take the value we're in on the for loop and then go to the next one. We know we won't go out of bounds because of this previous if check. So I plus 1 will put us at the next potential actor to lock onto, which changes the actor we're locked onto. That's where the magic really happens. Of course, because we changed it, we again want to call toggle lock on effects, and then we want to break. Now at this point, we have the logic to enable and disable locking on, and this will allow us to change the target that we're locking onto as well. This is good because this will allow us to actually get the result we want. However, remember all these toggle lock on effects, we need to fill that out so we can actually see the element right now. If we don't do the logic in toggle lock on effects, let me show you what that looks like. So if I go to my character and say I disable this event right here. Okay, now let's go play the game. And you'll notice that I can press the lock on button and lock on. And I can press the change lock on button to change the actor that I'm locking onto. And it works. However, there's no indicator. All right, so the code is doing a good enough job right now of keeping us where we want to be, locked on, all that good stuff. However, it makes it a lot better if we have an indicator to show where it is that we are actually locking onto, as opposed to just forcing the camera in a given direction. Now, the first thing we're going to need to do is make a widget that we want to display as that little indicator. And so go to wherever your widgets are. For me, I actually put it within my Blueprints widgets folder. I click Add, User Interface, Widget Blueprint. At this point, I called it the Lock On Indicator. You could call it Lock On Indicator Widget. You could call it, Lock On Widget. Whatever you want, doesn't matter. Just name it something, go into it. Now, I'm in Unreal Engine 5, but this will work in Unreal Engine 4 as well. The only difference with Unreal Engine 4 is you'll have a canvas here by default. Doesn't really change anything logically. You just see that I don't have a canvas here in Unreal 5. So it doesn't matter how you want to do this, canvas or no canvas, just drag an image onto the parent object. I brought it in to my lock on indicator here, but if you have a canvas, you can bring it and make it a child of the canvas. Make it the size you want. So I'll show you my settings, but this is really up to you. I made this little image. This is a random image that I made. You can make it look however you want. Change your image size. Again, you can look at all my details, but this is just relevant to how I want it to show up. There's nothing here that you have to do that will affect the end result. This is just for visuals. I have nothing in the graph. I can even delete that. I don't have anything in this widget graph. And this is all I have. So I have a widget that's basically just an image. No, you don't have to make a widget for just an image. However, what we want to do is actually have this widget as a 3D object in the world. And to do that, we can put a widget component on an actor. And then we can use this widget to spawn it in screen space. That way it renders over top of everything. You'll see more about that in a second, but this is why we're doing it this way. I've created a widget with an image that we can spawn into the world. That's the easiest way I can say it. All right, now once we have this done, that's as far as you have to go with that widget. So you can leave it alone for now. We have our lock-on indicator. Now what we have to do is make an object. I've put it in Blueprints, Objects UI, but you can put it wherever you want. We're going to spawn a 3D version of that widget. So to do this, you can see that I've made an actor child. So if we go to Blueprint, if we go to Add, Blueprints, and then Blueprint Class, we can choose Actor as the object. I'm not going to press it because I already have one, but you just click this button here, and it will spawn this type of object here. Now, I called it Lock-On Indicator Actor. And so Lock-On Indicator Actor, as I said, is going to have a widget component. So if we go into this actor that we made, again, there's nothing in the event graph. Okay, so I got rid of it. There's nothing in the event graph. We're just worried about the viewport. When you come in here, you'll have the actor itself, and then you have a default scene root. In our case, we don't need the default scene root at all, so you can override it if you'd like, or you can keep it like I've done here. It's not a problem. Regardless of how you do it, just click Add, and we're going to add a component, and we want to add a widget component. Okay, just widget, and you get this. It's going to be called widget. You can rename it as well. So click on your widget component, go into the details panel. You can see what I have here. The important things that you want to change are this. You have to make sure the space is screen. You could use a world space widget, but if you do, it's going to literally spawn an actor in the world, and you see it, not only does it not render on top of anything, but it also has an actual depth. And so it's like behind the pumpkin golem and inside, and it's only colored on the one side. It's a lower quality. There's a lot of weird stuff there that doesn't really help us here. But if we make it a screen space widget, yes, we can spawn it on the actor, but it gets rendered on as a screen space widget. So it's rendered above everything else, including the playable character. So I can see it no matter where the player is. I can see that I'm locked onto a character here. Now, the other thing you have to worry about is the widget class. So at this point, it's going to be none. And right now, it's actually very hidden because the box doesn't want to display the text. See that? But what you want to do is click on the widget class drop down, and you want to grab your lock on indicator. So this widget that you made here, grab that as the class. You can type it in or just find it in the list. It doesn't matter. And yeah, it's a little small and it gets smushed, but that's what you're really trying to do here. So you see it says lock on indicator. Now, once you do this, you may have to change the space again, by the way. So make sure that you have your widget selected and you have the space as screen. The draw size you can use as whatever. So you saw that I had 100 by 100 because if I had it as 500 by 500, it was very large. I don't want it to be this big. This is as big as it is on the widget, so it's really my fault that it's that big, right? Because I didn't change it on there. But it's up to you what you want to use. I recommend changing it in here. This way you get the full quality of the widget. You don't have to change the size of the image that's being displayed. But then it is altered to be the correct size you want to display on the screen. There's nothing else you have to do in here. I'll scroll down. You can look at everything, pause it if you want, take a look. But there's nothing else you have to change. We're just creating an actor so that we can spawn an actor in the world. And we can spawn it where it's going to be not only seen by the player, but also where it's going to be relevant to the data that it's trying to display. So it's trying to display the lock-on actor's location. So once you have both of these, we can now do the final part, which is setting up that toggle lock-on effects that we created in the code. It's a blueprint implementable event, so we have to go to our base character BP to fill it out. So you go into your base character BP. Nothing else has changed in any of the other sections, so I'm not going to look at that. Go to a new spot where you want to fill out some logic. Search for toggle lock on effects, and it's event toggle lock on effects. I've already grabbed it, but once you select that, it will bring it up. And now we just need to do the logic to spawn or delete that lock on indicator actor that we created. If we have an actor that we're locked onto, we want to check and see if we also have a lock on indicator. If we have a lock on indicator, we want to destroy that current one because that means we're already locked onto a different actor, and thus we're going to be changing it. So we can destroy the current and spawn a new one. If we have an actor that we're locked onto, but we don't have a lock on indicator, this is the first one we're making. We're not changing targets, we're just toggling the lock on as enabled. So we just want to create a new lock on indicator. If we're not locked onto a target, we want to see if the lock on indicator exists, and if it is, destroy it because we're disabling our lock on now. So we want to get rid of that actor. Okay, that's how the flow goes. So now let's actually type it out here. So we have our locked on actor that we were using, and that is the actor that we are focusing with our camera. So we want to get that, and we want to right click and convert it to a validated get because we need to know if it's valid or not valid. In the case of it being valid, we now need to see if we have an indicator for it. You won't have this yet. This is a variable that I made. So add a new variable. I called it lock on indicator ref for lock on indicator reference. And it's going to be our lock on indicator actor type. Okay, so lock on indicator actor object reference. You don't want the widget, you want the actor, and we want the object reference. Once you make it, it won't be set yet. We set it after, so don't worry about that. We want to get it, and we also want to convert that to a validated get because we want to check if it's valid or not valid. Okay. So now, if locked on actor is valid and our lock on indicator ref is valid, again, we want to destroy it because this means we are changing targets. So we want to get rid of the old one and create a new one. So you can drag off lock on indicator ref and just call destroy actor. This will clean it up safely. If it's not valid, we want to skip the destroy actor step. Don't do that. But either way, we want to end up at the same node afterward. You see I have a reroute node because both this, the destroy actor route, and the is not valid route end up going to the spawn actor node. So we want to spawn actor from class. And we want to select our class. This is our lock on indicator actor. Now, spawn transform will be empty. We have to plug something in so we know where it spawns. If we don't plug anything in, you'll get an error. So you won't be able to do that. To get the transform, think about where we're trying to place this widget. We're trying to place the lock-on indicator over top of the actor that we're locked onto. So it's very simple. We already have a locked-on actor that we know is valid here. We can drag off of it, type get actor transform, and it returns a transform for you. Pass that directly into the spawn transform. So we'll spawn directly at the center of that character. Now, after this actor is spawned, we want to go ahead and set our lock-on indicator reference to the return value of the spawn actor. Okay? And at this point, the entire top branch is taken care of. The only other thing we need to do is the is not valid on locked on actor. The only time locked on actor would be is not valid is if it got destroyed or cleaned up or we disabled lock on. So if this is not valid, we go and we check our lock on indicator ref again, but we don't have an is not valid branch for that. So only if this guy is valid do we go ahead and destroy him. And this will clean it up if we have any leftover references from a defeated actor or a disabled lock-on. And there we go, guys. So now we can play our game like normal. Add a sword to our inventory. Lock on to our opponent. Track them without manually moving the camera. And attack them when we want to. Now, right now, we will be able to defeat our opponent. Since the actor isn't really destroyed, we just hide the health bar and stuff. We will still be able to target on them. But don't worry, that will be naturally fixed as this series progresses, because we will, of course, clean up the pumpkin golems that are defeated, and there will no longer be an actor there. So don't worry about that. But after this, you'll be able to see your little indicator and change the targets that you're locking onto. One other note is that if you are locked onto an actor, we start this up again, and we are outside the range of the other lock-on actor, you may not be able to change to the other lock-on actor after you get into their range. Anyway, that is okay. That will be fixed up in the future because we have one more episode on locking on that I'd like to go over, and that will cover that specific mechanic as well as a few additional upgrades to the lock-on system. Anyway, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do. I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge, huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters and subscribers. Thank you guys for everything you've done and all the support you've given. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you guys are as excited about these series and these tutorials as I am. Makes it really fun to work on them, so thank you so much. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. It is completely free, and I'd be happy to help you with any problems you had. Make sure you can get moving again and working on your game. Anyway, guys, like I said, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.